When characters take the wheel, how flaws, fears, and consequences create story momentum. Hello, and welcome back to Stitches and Stories Studio, where stories begin and we talk about taking your writing from first draft to first reader. I'm Millie, your host, and I write science fiction and crime noir as Melissa L. Story and contemporary romance as Len Story. Around here, we talk about writing craft, indie publishing, author tools, creative routines, and the small decisions that help us keep moving forward as writers. Today, we're staying with the character conversation we started last week because last week we talked about developing believable characters, and this week we're taking that one step further and we're going to talk about what happens when those characters begin making choices and then those choices start driving the plot. Before we get into the craft topic, I want to touch on one small thing in the indie publishing space that caught my attention, and I think it's useful for beginning writers. One of the ongoing conversations this year has been discoverability, how the readers find us, how we build that visibility, and how indie books move beyond our own little corner of the internet. The Alliance of Independent Authors has been talking about that visibility and reader discovery this year, including its indie author bookstore, which is intended to give ally members another place where readers can browse indie authored books. And I'm mentioning this less as a single tool recommendation, more as a reminder of the bigger picture. For indie authors, publishing the book is one milestone. Helping readers find that book, that's the long game. That means our websites matter, our newsletters, our back matter even matters. Author pages, book descriptions, they all matter. And yes, even the occasional social media post can matter too, even when it feels like we're shouting gently into that decorative throw pillow. The encouraging part is that discoverability is made up of small pieces. A reader finds one post, one podcast episode or recommendation, one link or newsletter, maybe a book at a table at the book fair, a conversation at a book club, and suddenly there's a connection. It often begins quietly with one little moment that seems so small, which brings me to the produce section in my local grocery store. It's the lemon in the produce aisle. And since this episode is landing around Mother's Day, I had been thinking about what kind of personal story I might share. Mother's Day can be sweet, complicated, funny, tender, or all of those things, even before you finished your breakfast. Then, right there in the grocery store, life handed me a lemon, literally. I was in the produce section doing that awkward grocery store dance where you try to pick out what you need while staying out of everyone else's way. It's the dance with no music, no choreography, and a surprising amount of emotional pressure over a bin of citrus fruit. A lady, around my age or maybe a little older, reached towards the lemons. I thought I might be in her way, so I stepped aside and excused myself. She turned to me with a kind of friendliness you cannot schedule or rehearse, and she said, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" Me being me, said, "Hey, I'm great. How are you?" And that was all it took. That one little exchange to open the door. She told me the lemon was for a recipe she was making for Mother's Day. So I asked, "Well, are you the one who should be cooking on Mother's Day? Should someone be cooking for you instead?" And she said rather matter-of-factly, "No, I'm a spinster. My mother died years ago, and I don't have any kids." And I smiled at her in a way that you smile at someone when you recognize a kindred spirit. And I replied simply, "Samesies." Because sometimes the universe gives you a greeting card with flowers and glitter, and sometimes it gives you a woman in the produce aisle holding a lemon. The two of you understand each other faster than two people who's been trying to make polite conversation at the family reunion for over 40 years. She went on to tell me that her niece was in school in Italy, so she was cooking dinner for her sister, and then started telling me about the recipe. It was some kind of Chinese food casserole. I wish I could give you more information than that, but at this point, the lemon had become the main character and the casserole was some sort of subplot, and I was just trying to keep up. I asked where she'd gotten the recipe, and she pulled out a sheet of notebook paper with all the ingredients written down. Now, you know I'm a tactile person. I love my notebooks and my pens and my paper. I love a person who brings a handwritten note to the grocery store. This is a person with a plan. They came prepared. They've already had a long conversation with themselves at the kitchen table and decided this casserole was happening. I asked if I could take a picture of the ingredients. She said yes, and then told me that the recipe came from a cookbook with a burgundy cover. Now, she did give me the title, which I've already forgotten because apparently my brain had room for the lemon, the casserole, the niece in Italy, and the emotional weight of Mother's Day, but the cookbook title slipped right out the back door. So now I have this picture of ingredients with no idea how long to bake the thing or at what temperature, although I'm guessing somewhere around 350, which means sometimes this week I'll probably be on Google typing the ingredients into the search bar like a woman solving a cold case casserole. We talked for a few more minutes, said our goodbyes, and went on with the rest of our shopping. Now, my husband was standing not too far away and observed the entire exchange. And afterwards, he asked me if that was a lady from my office. And I said, "Oh, no, I've never met that lady before." And he said, "Oh, well, it looked like from the way you were talking, it was someone that you knew well and or worked with." And I said, "Oh, no, we were just discussing the rightness of a lemon in the Mother's Day recipe." And honestly, I love that. That is so perfect. That is the best part. And the reason I tell you this is because this fits in with this week's episode because it's character, it's story. A woman walks into the produce section for a lemon and she leaves behind a glimpse of her life, her family, her memories, her plans, a sense of humor, and the recipe that I am personally now invested in, even though I have no baking instructions and only half the plot. But isn't that how characters work on the page? They reveal themselves through tiny choices, through what they carry, and through what they say to strangers, who they're cooking for, how they saved the recipe, or how they came by it, by sharing a holiday observation in their own way with the lemon because someone they love needs dinner. And that's where today's topic really begins. So, as I mentioned, last week we talked about character development and how to create people on the page who feel layered, believable, and interesting. This week we're talking about what happens when those people start making choices, because the plot is rarely just a chain of events strung together. The strongest plots come from character decisions, flaws, fears, desires, and sometimes apparently a lemon in the produce aisle. Today we're talking about when characters take the wheel and how their choices can drive the story forward. Again, let me reiterate, plot is more than things happening. One of the biggest challenges for beginning writers is figuring out what the plot actually is. We hear that word all the time. Plot, structure, conflict, stakes, story arc, turning points. I mean, the whole thing can start to sound like we're building a piece of furniture from instructions translated through three languages and a raccoon. At this simplest plot, it's movement. Something changes, something happens, the story begins in one place, it ends someplace else, and a strong plot has more than just those events. It has cause and effect. And something I remember from when I was very young, and my father was explaining cause and effect to me, and he said, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Now I realize he was simplifying the, the explanation and trying to explain physics to a 5-year-old. But that rule seems to pop into my life in so many ways, and certainly not in ways intended. So I use it with my plot and my characters. An event can be a scene, a storm rolls in, or a letter arrives, a body is found. Maybe a ship loses power, stranger knocks on the door, a lemon becomes a conversation starter in the produce section. The event matters because the characters respond to it, and that response reveals who they are. Then, again, that response causes something else to happen, perhaps an equal and opposite reaction, like I mentioned a moment ago. The chain of choices and consequences becomes the living spine of the story. Like a storm is weather, a character deciding to drive through the storm because they're too proud to ask for help is plot. A letter is paper. A character hiding that letter from her sister because she's afraid of what it will do to the family is plot. A spaceship malfunction is a problem. The captain ignoring the warning because she refuses to admit she made a bad call, that's plot. And a body found in a library is an event. The detective recognizing the victim and then lying about it, that's plot with a pulse. That's the difference. Events are doors. Characters decide whether to open them, lock them, kick them in, or stand in the hallway pretending they never saw the door in the first place. And once that character makes that choice, then your story starts to move forward. So let's think about how desire gives the story direction. To let your characters drive the plot, you need to know what they want. Desire gives the story some direction. It can be large and dramatic, like a character may want to save a kingdom, solve a murder, find a lost civilization, win a trial, escape from a villain, or make it home before oxygen runs out. That desire can also be quiet and deeply personal. A character may want to be forgiven, or to protect a child, or to prove they belong, or they may want to keep the family together. They may want to be seen as capable. They may want a peaceful dinner where nobody brings up that one thing everybody has been avoiding for 12 years. Large desires give the book scale. Personal desires give the book heart. When you know what they're moving toward, you begin placing obstacles in their path. And that's where the story starts to take shape. Think again about the lady in the grocery store. She wanted a lemon for a recipe. Well, that's simple enough. But underneath it, she wanted to cook for her sister, She wanted to honor Mother's Day in a way that fit her lifestyle because she didn't have children. She wanted to show up with care by making something by hand. She wanted that casserole to happen, and that one lemon mattered to the recipe. In fiction, the thing your character reaches for on the outside often reveals the one thing they're reaching for on the inside. A detective wants to solve a case, but underneath, they really want redemption. Maybe a romance heroine wants to save the family in, but underneath, she really wants to prove that she can build a life on her own terms. The space explorer who wants to decode that alien signal, but underneath, she wants to know whether humanity is alone or whether knowledge can be trusted, and if the past is trying to warn the future. Desire points the character forward. It tells the reader what matters. It helps the writer decide what belongs in the story and what can stay in the folder titled Interesting Ideas That I May Never Use but Refuse to Delete. Let's talk about fear creating tension. Seems kind of obvious, but desire tells us where the character wants to go. Fear tells us why they're getting there will hurt. A character who wants love but fears abandonment will take one kind of choice. A character who wants love and fears losing independence will make another. They may be standing in the same room, having the same conversation, hearing the same words, and still create completely different stories because their fears are different. And fear complicates desire. A character that wants truth but fears what the truth will cost, or wants success but fears that being as exposed as a fraud, something that writers sometimes feel, imposter syndrome. A character wants family but feels being trapped by obligation, or maybe they want adventure but fears becoming the person that they had to leave behind. And so that is where the tension lives. If your plot feels flat, look for fear. Ask yourself, what is your character trying to avoid? What would they rather do than face the one thing that truly matters? Ask what truth they have built in their life and why are they avoiding it? Then put that truth in a room with them. Watch them squirm a little. Lovingly, of course. We don't want to kill all of our darlings. We are writers. We can torment imaginary people with purpose. But fear gives your scenes friction, and it makes the characters hesitate, deflect, deny, overreact, maybe joke, run or hide, or take control of the situation in all the wrong ways. Fear also gives the reader something to feel. Readers will be drawn in by the cool premise, but they stay because they sense the character has something more personal at stake. In the grocery store story, there was a tiny emotional turn when the woman said that her mother had died years ago and she had no children. That conversation could have stopped there. It could have become awkward, but instead she kept going. She talked about her niece in Italy, her sister, the recipe, the cook. That small moment turned the exchange from casual chatter into a glimpse of her life. And she had a history, had a loss, had family. She also had plans and humor and a purpose. And that is what fear and vulnerability do in fiction. They open a window. Now, what about flaws? Our characters can't be perfect because none of us are perfect. And we want to be able to relate to the characters that we're reading about on some level, not every level, but flaws are where the story gets wonderfully inconvenient. A perfect character waits politely for the plot to arrive. A flawed character creates problems before breakfast. They trust the wrong person, they hide information, react too quickly, avoid the hard conversations. Maybe they choose pride over honesty. They choose safety over courage and control over connection. They decide they can handle everything alone, which almost always is when the ceiling comes crashing in. Flaw is useful because it pushes the character into choices that have consequences, and those consequences can create the next scene and the story momentum. The important thing is that the flaw should grow out of who the character really is, rather than being taped onto the outside like a decorative label. If your character is controlling, why? Did they grow up in chaos? Did they lose someone and then they feel powerless? Did they learn that being prepared was the only way to feel safe? If your character avoids commitment, ask yourself why. Did love cost them something? Did they watch someone else lose themselves in a relationship? Did they build a life where leaving was easier than being left? Is your character restless? If your character is reckless, why are they reckless? Are they brave, bored, guilty, grieving, desperate to feel alive? The stronger you understand the root of the flaw, the more natural that flaw will generate the plot. And here's a little key. The flaw should help the character survive at first, but hurt them later. A woman who learned to be independent may build a strong life, then struggle when she needs help. A detective who notices every detail may solve cases, then destroy relationships because they can't stop interrogating people at breakfast. A captain who trusts her instincts may save a crew, then put them in danger when she refuses to listen to new evidence. The flaw is useful and until it becomes costly, and then the cost is where growth begins. For writers, this is a powerful tool. When you feel stuck, ask your character what's the flaw going to make them do next. Then ask what the consequences would be that naturally flow from that. That's when it's most, rather than asking a random exciting thing, what happened next, some random excitement gives you fireworks, but character driven consequences, that gives you the fire. So, don't go for the whole shiny object and the perfect character. Give them a flaw, give them some fears, some real life drama and consequences, bake it into their backstory. And one simple way to strengthen your plot is to use what I call the because of that test. So look at the scenes in your story and ask whether they are connected by cause and effect. The character wants something. Because of that, they make a choice. Because of that choice, something changes. Because something changes, they now have to face a harder choice. That pattern can carry a story a long way. A beginning writer may outline a story like this. The heroine gets a job at the inn. Then her old boyfriend comes back to town. Then a storm damages the building. Then they argue. Then they kiss. And then the investor shows up. And that's all perfectly good. I mean, those are good ingredients, but the ingredients alone are not going to make the casserole, right? I mean, it's me and the mystery of the lemon lady. So the stronger the version connects the events through choices, then the heroine takes the job at the end because she needs to prove she can save something for her family, something that her family gave up on. Her old boyfriend comes back because he heard the inn is being sold and he wants to buy it. She hides the financial reports because she's embarrassed. Because she hides them, he makes the wrong assumption. Because he makes that assumption, he offers to help in the worst possible way. And because he does that, she pushes him away. And because she pushes him away, the investor takes the advantage of the situation. Now the plot's moving because people are making choices, and those choices are messy and emotional and connected. And you can do this in any genre. In a mystery, it might be an amateur sleuth lies to the police because they want to protect their friend. Because they lie, they become a suspect. Because they're a suspect and they have to investigate their friend on their own. And because they're investigating on their own, they find evidence the police missed. And that's when then the killer notices the private investigator. So, it can all kind of come around full circle, but it kind of leads the breadcrumbs of the story to these fears, these flaws, these choices for your reader to follow. And it also, at the same time, is adding layers and depth to your character. Personal example in science fiction, an archaeologist activates the alien device because she believes the knowledge could save a colony. Because she activates it, the ship's AI begins to glitch because there's interference between the two. Because the AI glitches, the crew loses trust in the mission. The crew fractures, the enemy gets closer, and then the archaeologist must decide whether the truth is worth the danger it creates. So there's a multitude of ways to work this kind of character building and moving the plot forward with your character's decisions. As many ways as you can possibly think of. But what gives the characters agency? And that's another word that writers hear a lot. Character agency just means that the character has the ability to make meaningful choices that affect the story. This is important because readers want to feel that the main character is participating in the story rather than being carried along like a purse on a crowded bus. The character can face terrible odds, be trapped, betrayed, outnumbered, grieving, confused, feeling pressured, and have limited options. And those limited options make for better drama when we give them limits to work within and make them choose. We sometimes have to set the stage for our characters to make a choice. They can choose whether to tell the truth, who to trust, to stay or to go, to break the rules, whether to forgive. And these are going to make the reader lean in and lean forward into the story. If your story is dragging the character from scene to scene, pause and ask where your character has made a decision. And the decision can be small, but even a small decision can be revealing. And the leads a message to answering it, or if they keep a photograph in a drawer or a lie about where they were, the character has now agency that lives in those moments. Something else that you'll hear a lot in your plot and your character development is conflict. You always have to have some sort of conflict in your story. Now, it can be just a matter of a decision like we were just talking about, whether to hide something, reveal something, and it can be smaller, it can be large. It can be external and internal. So, a satisfying story often has two kinds of conflict working together, and that's the aforementioned internal external. The external conflict, of course, is going to be the more visible problem, the deadline, the murder, the storm, the broken ship. The internal conflict is going to be the emotional problem, the fear, the wound, the belief that the characters carry with them. It's the thing that they have to face inside themselves in order to move forward. And when those two conflicts work together, the plot becomes so much more powerful. So let's say your character needs to ask for help to save the family business. The external conflict is financial. The internal conflict might be pride or shame or fear of being controlled, and maybe even resentment to a person who can help, like an ex boyfriend. So now the scene has one more layer, and the character is not simply trying to get a loan or sign a contract. They're trying to preserve their dignity, maybe avoid an old pain, deciding whether survival is worth trusting someone that they would rather keep at a safe emotional distance. So that's where you should really start to build some interest into your scenes. External conflict is going to ask what happens next. Internal conflict is going to ask how much is it going to cost. And when you answer both questions, you're really starting to give your story some depth. Here's a practical exercise you can try if you want this week. Take one character from your work in progress. It can be your main character or a side character, be it love interest, villain, or best friend. Ask, what is it that this character wants right now? Keep it specific. They may want the promotion, an apology, a kiss, a room key, a recipe, a chance to leave before anyone asks how they're really doing if they're at a party. Then ask, what are they afraid of? What do they think is going to happen? What are they concerned about if something does happen? This makes the scene deeper. Is there a fear of rejection, exposure, being proven wrong? Next, ask, what choice would they make that would make their situation more complicated? And this is a fun one. Writers are allowed to be a little mischievous. I mean, would your character lie? Would they confess too soon? Would they hide the evidence? Would they choose a path but regret it immediately? Ask what consequences follow to choices that your character makes. The sequence should create the next scene. It should change the situation, and it could make the character face something that they really would rather avoid. So you can do this with a whole chapter. You can do it with a single scene. I would start small, just one character, one want, one fear, one choice, one consequence, and let that build momentum. See what happens. I mean, you could be off and running into a whole new second book, a whole new story with your side character or something like that. So, or could make this book, depending on how far along and you are in your work in progress, deeper, richer. If you're struggling for progress, you feel like you've been stuck around 20,000 words and you just can't seem to be moving forward. This little exercise may help. What does this mean for revision? So let's approach this uh, and as a way when you're revising your first draft. So you've got a first rough draft, and the scenes they all feel pleasant or interesting, beautifully written, but the story maybe feels a little slow, and that can happen. An issue may be that the scenes are sitting beside each other rather than causing each other, so they're not leading one to another, no cause and effect. So during the revision, look at each scene and ask, what can change? Has the character learned something, lost something? Did they reveal something? If the answer's a little fuzzy, then it may need to be stronger. Excuse me. And a scene can turn emotional. I mean, characters realize that they still care, or a clue appears and the scene turns to something more practical, can turn into a moral question if a character crosses a line or is thinking of crossing a line with their internal struggle. So the reader keeps going because something has changed and they want to know what's happening next. What's the character going to do next? How are they going to handle this new situation? How much more is the character, going to be able to take? And that's why a character-driven plot is so powerful. And it can give revision a real purpose. You're not just simply polishing sentences or doing some line edit. You can go back and add some strength to the chain of choices that carries the reader through the story. Now, I've talked about being able to do this in various genres, so let's take a few minutes to look at how it works with the different genres, because you do have tropes in all of the genres, and you want to make sure you don't have to hit all of them in every single book, but at least hit some of the major ones, because if you don't, your readers are going to be disappointed. The book is going to miss their expectation. So while you're working through your tropes, add this layering. You can certainly do it. So let's start with romance. Characters often drive the plot through emotional risk. They choose whether to trust or confess or forgive, to stay or to go. The external story may involve a wedding or a small town festival, maybe a business rivalry, second chance romance. And the emotional story is going to be about vulnerability. And the plot works when each choice brings the character closer to intimacy while also forcing them to face the fears that kept them apart or away from the thing that they are now forced to face. In mystery, characters drive their plot through curiosity, suspicion, maybe a moral pressure. A sleuth chooses to ask that one more question, follow one more lead, or even keep a secret. They may confront the wrong person at the wrong time, and those choices turn clues into consequences. In science fiction, fantasy, the world is much bigger, but those stories still needs to have personal stakes, a rebellion, prophecy, an alien artifact, or a magical system. A galactic threat becomes more meaningful when a specific character must choose what they're willing to risk. And the fate of the world matters more when you understand the heart of the person trying to save it. And then for thrillers, the character's choice often takes place under pressure. The clock is ticking, limited time, limited information, but lots of danger. The plot moves as the character has to act before they're ready, maybe taking a chance, taking a big risk. Each action changes the danger around them. So across the genres, the principle remains the same. Plot gains power when it grows from who your character is, what they want, what they fear, and what they do under pressure. So I keep thinking about this grocery store conversation because it reminds me how quickly characters appear when someone makes a choice in a specific moment. That lady could have picked up the lemon and kept walking. I could have said, excuse me, and walked away. We could have passed each other and the produce section with no more meaning than two shopping carts trying to avoid a traffic jam near the bananas. But instead, she spoke, I answered. She shared a recipe, I asked a question. She told me a little bit more, and again, I asked another question to take the picture, and just the way that the conversation unfolded, it looked like two old friends, having a conversation when we were really strangers. I don't even know her name, and she doesn't know mine. So, it's just kind of in that moment, choices were made and it led to this little story. So it doesn't need to be, big explosions, secret tunnels, dramatic confessions in the rain. A story can begin with a woman buying a lemon for her sister's Mother's Day dinner and a handwritten note with a recipe. And as writers, our job is to notice those moments, to understand that character shows up in these actions. It shows up in what people choose to say or what they choose to hide, what they carry into the grocery store, what they're willing to cook for someone they love. And when you build characters with that kind of attention, your plot can really, really grow from that. Now, let's look at it from the opposite view. What if she had chose not to say hello, or what if I had avoided eye contact with her and walked away? What would be the reason for that? Why would I have that reaction instead of responding to her? And what would be the underlying cause? Did I have a bad experience in a grocery store with a stranger? I mean, who knows? So those are just things to think about. If your character is doing one thing, maybe ask yourself, what would happen if they did the opposite? And maybe not your character, but maybe a side character. So here's a little encouragement. If you're a beginning writer and this sounds like a lot to juggle, just take a breath. You don't have to know everything about every character before you begin. Sometimes you discover the character by watching what they do on the page. You can start with one desire, one fear, one choice or consequence, and let that character move. Let them make a mess. Let them say the wrong thing or do something badly, take a risk, let them avoid the truth until the truth blocks the door, and maybe they'll surprise you. And when you get stuck, stop asking only what happens next. Ask what your character would choose next based on who they are right now. And that might open the story back up for you. So this week, as you work on your own stories, pay close attention to the choices your characters are making. Look at the scenes, see if they feel flat. Ask whether the character has enough desire, enough fear, or consequences for the moments that they're experiencing. And in your real life, pay attention too, because stories are everywhere. They're at family dinners, they're in old cookbooks, handwritten grocery lists, conversations between strangers. Apparently, lemons are a big conversation starter. So just be on the lookout because sometimes these things happen in the most unexpected places. So I want to thank you for spending your time with me here at Stitches and Stories Studio. And if this episode encouraged you in any way, you'd like to share it with another writer who's trying to find their way from first draft to first reader, please share this with them. You can also find me at stitchesandstories.com. You can email me at Millie, Illy, at stitchesandstories.com. You can find me on Instagram as Melissa L. Story _author, Facebook, YouTube, Substack as Melissa L. Story. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a paid supporter on Substack. Your support keeps these conversations going, helps me continue to create content and resources for writers who are building their creative lives one choice at a time. You can also support me at Buy Me a Cup of Coffee uh, as Melissa L. Story. Also, if you'd like to be a sponsor of the show or even just sponsor an episode, if you've got a book you want to promote or a writing related service, give me a shout at Millie at stitchesandstories.com. Until next time, keep writing, keep reading, and remember sometimes the plot begins when your character reaches for a lemon.